Give me a break, guys. It's summer. It's too hot for the hoodie. So I had a commenter ask me my thoughts on what Chris Chibnall has said about the generalities of his plan for Doctor Who. I had read all this back when he said it a couple, maybe 2-3 weeks ago. I didn't do a video on it at the time, partly because I wasn't sure that I had enough to say to take up a video on it. I'm still not entirely sure I do, but I'm kind of riding a Doctor Who high right now with the latest series having ended, and I'm currently working on my next Doctor Who list, which is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and it's long overdue. So yeah, I'm still in that mindset. I kind of want to still talk Doctor Who. So in case you either didn't hear what he said or you kind of forgot, because like I said, it's been a little while, try and do stuff a little more timely than this. But Chris Chibnall basically, he said a couple of things. He said he was initially reluctant to take the gig of heading Doctor Who, and basically BBC had to woo him. This wasn't something he was chomping at the bit for. And part of the reason he was hesitant was he didn't think they would let him do what he wants to do. Now, he was very vague in terms of what that was, but he did say that he presented them with a plan, expecting them to go, let's talk about this, but instead they went, that's great, go ahead and do it. And one specific thing he mentioned was a 5-year plan, and that's, I suppose that's the thing most worth kind of examining, because even though we've had Doctor Who showrunners on the show for that long, or longer in the case of Stephen Moffat, you have to keep in mind that by and large the way the show has been structured has been fairly self-contained series to series. Now, the end of any given series might set up, some sort of teaser for usually the Christmas special. We certainly got that with this most recent episode. But whatever story was being told within that series gets fairly closed off. So the idea of inserting a 5-year plan could mean a number of things, and if he was concerned that BBC wasn't going to let him do it, that would lean more towards the more, I don't want to say radical, but more divergent from what we're used to theories. Because if it was just as, I have these 5 ideas for a series story, so I guess that's a 5-year plan, I'm sure he wouldn't have been nervous about it. So he must be thinking something bigger. So there's a couple of possibilities, I suppose. The first is, like, if he goes like way out of the box, we could be talking basically something like Breaking Bad, which is more or less one continuous story told over the course of 5 seasons of television. I'm not sure if I'm going to be hesitant to say I think that's what he means. I'm kind of hoping he doesn't, because that is so divergent from what Doctor Who tends to do that I think that might be a step too far in one direction. And the other thing about that is it is a tricky sort of way to work when you have as vocal a fan base that gives as much immediate feedback as the Doctor Who fan base does. Because when you're working series to series, it's easier to make adjustments. Now, that's not to say that you can't change anything if you're going, with some sort of 5-year overall story plan. But if you're doing that, the amount of change you can make to accommodate characters that aren't landing the way you wanted, a character that was unexpectedly more popular than you wanted, etc., how much you can adjust that gets hampered somewhat by whatever the story necessities of what you've already planned are. That's how, in something like, say, Game of Thrones, we've ended up with a small pile of unresolved plot points that basically have never come up again. They may have been put in there originally intended by the showrunners to eventually come up, but they decided it either wasn't worth it or the story wasn't impacting the way they thought it would, and it just gets abandoned. That's the sort of thing that happens when you go in thinking, this is my plan, but then you have to adjust as you go. So in terms of more long-term storytelling, that's some of the potential fallback. I think what might be more likely is that he's going to take what is kind of the standard series structure of Doctor Who and stretch it over more years than is normal. So standard series of Doctor Who, by and large, has a overall plot going on in the background. Things like the mystery of the Impossible Girl, the Vault, Bad Wolf, etc., etc., etc. Pretty much every series has some equivalent of this. So that's going on in the background of what are more or less self-contained stories, told complete within single episodes or 2-parters. So what he may be doing is taking a story and extending it over multiple series, as opposed to having whatever the background recurring situation is get resolved at the end of any given series and then moving on to another one. And if that is the way he goes, that makes more sense to me as in terms of a logical extension. Now, part of what's hampering my ability to speculate too much about this is partly because, honestly, speculation doesn't come very naturally to me, but also the fact that I have still yet to see Broadchurch, so I don't really have a sense of Chibnall as a showrunner, as opposed to just a Doctor Who writer. So my impression of Broadchurch, though, was that it was a continuous story told over the course of that first series. I know it's had a second series now. I haven't really gauged what the reaction to that is. It even out? I don't know. I mean to get around to it, but I haven't caught up. So in any case, that is basically one story, this one mystery told over these multiple episodes. And if that's his comfort zone, that's not, like I said, that's a big departure from what Doctor Who usually is. But he does say that he wanted to do something very different. And I don't know, I think in some ways BBC is trying to recapture the heat a little bit that existed a little bit more with Tennant and a lot of Smith's run. People are weird. There are fans, and this happens in my own comments, people like quoting the viewer numbers and whatever else about trying to prove that the show is crap now. I never pay attention to the viewer numbers, but I do know that right now, just simply by looking around, Doctor Who is not the ubiquitous massive thing that it was under Tennant and under Smith. So, even though I hardly think it's like crashing or anything like that, again, don't quote me viewer numbers, I don't care. But in any case, the general sense is that while the show, people may feel it's gotten better, may feel it's gotten worse, the overall impact the show has on the world at large seems to have lessened some, and I think BBC might be more willing to roll the dice, hoping to shake that up. Now, things have gotten shaken up to a certain extent with how things have gone along. So even though Chibnall says, he wants to do something really different, the show's been pretty consistently different up to this point. I mean, Matt Smith was a really different choice. Because he was a guy basically nobody had heard of. Peter Capaldi, a huge departure in terms of the characterization of the Doctor itself. The structure they've altered somewhat. They have split series into more or less two halves. They have had, ones that were almost entirely self-contained episodes. They've had ones that were almost entirely two-parters. So it seems like BBC is willing to let the showrunner experiment a bit more. Now, whether that is just confidence that the Doctor Who brand can weather whatever weirdness, or if it's desperation of, for the love of God, try anything, we want to get back to our height, I am not in a position to say, and I honestly don't know. I like to think it's the former, but it's possible that it's the latter. We'll see. But I do like that Chibnall very clearly had big ideas for this job, and that the only reason he was reluctant was he wasn't sure he'd get to execute them. That somebody with that kind of ambition, that's a good sort of person to put at the head of this. Again, his writing on Doctor Who itself, I've been, it's okay. I haven't seen Broadchurch. I've heard it's great. So, I am still looking forward to this, and I'm obviously very much awaiting the announcement of who the next Doctor is going to be. I say awaiting. I really, truly don't want to know until the regeneration happens, but I have no expectation that they'll be able to keep it under wraps that long. So I'm just sort of waiting around for when it drops, and obviously when it does, I'll have my thoughts on that. And as I said, I do have kind of a Doctor Who list that I've been meaning to do for quite a while, and I kept putting off, and gotta try and have it out this weekend. And saying that, I might have just jinxed it. We'll see. But in any case, your thoughts on what you hope Chibnall does or doesn't bring to Doctor Who, whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, check me out on Twitter at Council of Geeks, give a listen to the Council of Geeks podcast, and I'm also one half of the Punch Like a Girl podcast, both available on iTunes and Stitcher. And until next time, this council is adjourned.